11 years, never seen again. The husband I loved for 11 years suddenly said, "Let's get a divorce. I want to give her a position." The next day, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. From that day on, he never returned home, only news of them constantly appearing on social media. As for me, I also gave up supporting his company, just standing by to see how far he could go on his own. Chapter 1. The sky was clear, the sun was gentle, and the wind was blowing gently. Brian Anderson and I walked into the Civil Affairs Bureau. The wind blew past, messing up my hair. He raised his hand out of habit to fix my hair. Seeing that scene, the marriage clerk immediately invited us to sit down. "Excuse me, we're here to file for a divorce." After I finished speaking, the clerks opened their eyes wide, then looked at each other in surprise. We were led into the office, and the person in charge asked the reason for the divorce. Brian pursed his lips and said nothing. I kindly answered for him. Incompatible personalities, broken feelings. Those were the words, but everyone knew that it was just a social story. In reality, the reason was that he already had someone he wanted to protect with all his heart. That girl was an employee at the coffee shop below his company building. Picking her up and dropping her off, taking good care of her when she was sick, buying her branded clothes, giving her a big bouquet of flowers at the school festival, and even publicly admitting that he sponsored the festival for his little girlfriend's program. He became her protector. As for me agreeing to divorce, the reason was even simpler. I don't need the kind of trash that other people have touched. Looking at the slightly discolored marriage registration book, the staff advised us not to be hasty, and to think about the days we spent together. "I'm very busy, hurry up." His cold words made the staff quickly complete the procedure. About half an hour later, we each received a piece of paper recording the time we spent thinking before the divorce. Brian pursed his lips. "Ollie, where do you want to go?" "I'll take you." Without waiting for me to refuse, he quickly walked back to the parking lot and drove in front of me. I reached out, habitually intending to open the passenger door. Suddenly remembering that he and I were no longer husband and wife. Facing his complicated gaze, I calmly sat in the back seat. The car rolled steadily, blending into the traffic. Even though I was sitting in the back, looking at the rearview mirror was enough to see that he was in a good mood today. "Please turn up the temperature a bit. I'm allergic to pollen, and this cold weather makes me even more uncomfortable." He was silent, handing me a pack of tissues. He and I were childhood friends, growing up together. We've been in love for 4 years, married for 7 years. He knew very well that I wasn't allergic to pollen. "Ollie." "Mr. Anderson, please call me Miss Mitchell or Alice Mitchell." "Okay, Alice Mitchell. I'll tell both parents about this divorce. Brian always likes to do everything for me." Actually, he wasn't like that when he was young. When he was young, he was a skinny, shy boy, afraid of strangers. In kindergarten, he was always bullied by others. As for me, with an extroverted personality, hating evil like an enemy, I was really the little boss in the class. Because his mother often gave me delicious food, I had to pay attention to take care of him. I once climbed up the kindergarten loudspeaker and announced to the whole school, "Brian Anderson is mine, Alice Mitchell protects him." From then on, he passed his kindergarten days peacefully, gradually grew up, and became the hot boy of middle school and high school. At that time, I considered him as a good brother. But he stuck to me every day, forced me to study extra math, and wanted to take the entrance exam to the same university as me. In the end, I really entered the same university with him. He became the hot boy of the school, and at the same time, he was the biggest obstacle in my love life. With him by my side, no matter how beautiful I was, how good my personality was, and how many friends I had. For 4 years in college, no male student dared to approach me, let alone confess. On graduation day, he took me to the science fair. Thanks to my friend in the student union, he turned off all the lights, leaving only a brilliant starry sky that I had never seen before. He held my hand, his palms sweaty. "Ollie, marry me. I swear to spend my whole life treating you well." At that time, I did not hesitate. But today, facing him, I did not hesitate to refuse. "Mr. Anderson, you don't have to worry about my business. I will handle it myself." My tone was too polite and distant, causing him to frown involuntarily. In the quiet car for a while, he suddenly smiled and asked me how I planned to explain to my parents. Seeing that I did not respond, he sneered, "Alice, don't tell me you regret it." Only then did I take my eyes off my phone and look at him. "Huh? Please drive carefully, don't lose focus. As for the reason, I already told you, I will handle it myself." I did not want to die tragically on the road with my ex-husband on my first day as a single person. Hearing the carelessness in my words, he gripped the steering wheel tighter. Suddenly the phone rang. It was his phone connected to the Bluetooth in the car. The ringtone was a sweet love song that young girls like. Despite me still sitting in the car, he answered the call. The girl's soft and sweet voice echoed throughout the car. "I've been studying all day, and I have to work at a coffee shop at night. I'm starving." He glanced at me. Seeing that my expression didn't change, he smiled and replied, "I know you're being obedient and enduring hunger. I'll go buy the seafood porridge and crab dumplings you like, okay?" The two of them chatted sweetly. After the call ended, without waiting for him to say anything, I pointed to the intersection ahead. "Just stop here and drop me off." The black car stopped by the side of the road. I got out and left immediately, looking as if I was afraid that if I was even a second late, I would get sick. When the car disappeared from sight, I hugged my stomach tightly, cold sweat running down my body. My whole body felt like it was about to collapse onto the sidewalk. 2 months ago, he called to say that he forgot to bring a very important document. I immediately took the document and hurriedly drove to his company. On the way, a speeding truck had to brake suddenly and overturned, crushing my car. Luckily, my life was saved, but the impact was so great that my left leg suffered a fracture. At that time, in pain and fear of the after effects, I called him many times. However, his phone was always turned off. Only later did I know that, just because of a sentence from that girl that she had never seen pigeons in France, he immediately bought plane ticket to Paris. They spent a whole week in Paris. Because I was afraid that my parents would worry, I did not tell them about this. In the end, only Fiona Morgan, my best friend, was there to take care of me during my surgery and rehabilitation. At that moment, I decided that I didn't need that useless man anymore. I went home alone and prepared a simple lunch. I had just finished eating and was cleaning up when I received a text message from Fiona. "Ollie, you haven't even officially divorced Brian yet, but he dared to openly bring his mistress to celebrate. Doesn't he have any shame?" The text message included a photo of Brian and a young girl dining at a restaurant. It was the same restaurant where I had previously texted Brian that I wanted to go with him, but was rejected because he was busy. A sudden feeling of nausea rose in my throat. In a flash, I seemed to think of something. The next day, I woke up early and went to the hospital. The doctor looked at the blood test results, then said to me, "Congratulations, Miss Mitchell, according to the test results, you are 13 weeks pregnant, that is, 3 months." I was silent for a moment. "Please schedule a surgery for me." In the early years of our marriage, Brian stuck to me almost every day. We both wanted to have children. But many years passed. Even though both of us were in perfect health, we still could not have children. Now, after the divorce, the child appeared. Well, it was also an unfortunate fate, falling at this exact time. As soon as I stepped out of the clinic, I saw Brian and that obedient mistress, Rachel Spencer, standing at the door. My hand holding the bag suddenly tightened. "We haven't even officially divorced, Rachel is already pregnant?" Seeing me, Rachel's first reaction was to hide behind Brian, as if she was one step slower, I would kill her. His eyes were full of vigilance. He must have thought I followed them here. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, he continued, "Alice, we should break up clearly. Rachel's health is not good, you following her like this will scare her." Hearing that, I knew I guessed right. "Look carefully, I came first. Moreover, this is the obstetrics department. Could it be that your little friend is pregnant? Brian, don't forget, we haven't divorced yet." After saying that, I turned around to leave, but suddenly someone called my name from behind. Turning around, I saw a young man, wearing a white blouse, walking straight towards me. Immediately, Brian's eyes became even colder. "Who is he? How did you know him?" The man ignored Brian's question and went on to ask about my injury and recovery. I smiled. "Thanks to Dr. Dixon, I can walk normally now." Brian suddenly stepped forward and grabbed my shoulder. "What recovery? Didn't you just have a minor injury? Why do you need recovery?" He had only heard the secretary say that I was injured, and immediately thought it was just a minor injury, completely unaware that I was so seriously injured. In fact, if he only paid attention to the time I was in the hospital or my gait, he would realize that I couldn't have just suffered a minor injury. Unfortunately, since I was injured, he had been busy with work or spending sweet time with Rachel. Where did he have the energy to care about me? "What's wrong with my leg has nothing to do with you," I replied coldly. "Don't forget that we're in the process of getting a divorce." His face immediately darkened. At this moment, Rachel suddenly burst into tears, as if I was the one who was pressuring her. "Sister Alice, I've always wanted to apologize to you. I also advised Brian to cherish you and treat you well. Everything that happened was my fault. No matter if you hit me, scolded me, or did anything to me, I would accept it." In front of her pretending to repent, I calmly said, "First, I'm an only child. Second, this isn't a movie. No matter how well you act, you can only fool Brian. Third, your acting is terrible." Seeing that I wasn't as agitated as expected, she paused slightly, then covered her stomach, looking extremely resentful as she looked at Brian. His eyes were filled with heartache. He gently hugged her, wiping away her tears, and reproaching me, "Alice, there are 29 days left to think before the divorce. You know my personality, don't cause trouble. If you make things tense, you will be the one who suffers in the end." After saying that, he pulled Rachel away. Dr. Dixon walked to me. "Alice, are you okay?" People are like that. When facing everything alone, they may not feel pain or sadness. But as long as they receive attention from others, the feeling of resentment will be unbearable. I looked at him tiredly. "Can you help me?" Before I could continue, he immediately agreed. With the help of Dr. Dixon, I completed the abortion procedure that same day. When I was pushed out of the operating room, I seemed to see a familiar figure. But because I was too exhausted, I didn't have time to think much, nor did I pay attention to that familiar figure. After the surgery, Brian never heard from me again, whether it was a call or a text. How I clung to him in the past, I am now so silent. A week later, Brian was drunk and brought Rachel to our house. He hugged her, from the door to the bedroom, not expecting me to be changing in the dressing room. After changing, I walked out and approached them. "Please make way, I have to go out." The atmosphere seemed to freeze. Brian saw me, reflexively let go of the hand that was holding Rachel, then turned his head and softly said to her, "You go out first." She gave me a hateful glance, then obediently turned and left the bedroom. While I was turning my back to choose my bag, he suddenly and quietly approached from behind. His two arms stretched out in front, trapping me between the wardrobe and him. "Alice, dressed like this at night, are you going to meet some man?" I didn't expect something I don't need to be so expensive. What did he mean by like that? I was only wearing a shirt and a short skirt, the kind of normal clothes that anyone could see on the street. And something I don't need? What a cheap man. Since when did this guy become so shameless? Why didn't I notice before? I pushed him away, but couldn't push him away. Then the only way left was to use my hands. I slapped him hard across the face. "What do you mean? Something you don't need? Is this your quality? Don't forget, even though I'm in the midst of a divorce, I can change my mind at any time. When that happens, don't blame me for letting your little mistress be the third wheel for life." After saying that, while he was still stunned by the slap, I pushed him away and quickly walked out of the dressing room. When I got to the living room, I was unlucky enough to bump into Rachel, who was holding a glass of water. "Alice, you look really nice, do you have a date? I didn't expect you to be so quick." she said, then hesitated, as if on purpose. Brian gritted his teeth, intending to say a few more insulting words. I conveniently picked up the glass of water and threw it straight at Rachel's face. If you keep talking rudely, I won't just splash water on you to wash your mouth. The phone rang. I smiled comfortably, answered the phone and walked out the main door. Looking at my relieved back, Brian followed with a cold face. Until he saw me get into a silver car and leave without looking back, he was just standing there in the dust. Ollie, have you really decided? The man in the driver's seat spoke, his face cold, his deep eyes filled with unconcealed sorrow. You know me, once I decide, I will never change. Daniel, can you help me with something? I looked at him, my eyes never leaving him. I only saw him slightly lower his head and smile faintly, his hands unconsciously tightening the steering wheel, his eyes looking straight ahead, his voice gentle but determined. You know, Ollie, I have never refused anything you asked for. I'll help you. The car stopped in front of a bar. I got out of the car, pushed the door open and went in. In the private room, the atmosphere was very lively. Before I even got there, I heard the sound of chatter. Alice, why are you just coming now? Everyone has been waiting for you for a while. That's right, you were the one who asked us out, but you're the last one. Punish you with a glass of wine. I walked in, sat down comfortably, and generously agreed right away. The people here were all the capital and network of relationships I had built over the years. It was thanks to them that Brian's company had developed to its current state. In this room, all of them were friends I had known for a long time, some from high school, some from college when Brian started his business. There was only one thing in common: all of them, without exception, were clients of Brian's company, the big bosses who gave him money. The only difference was that they were, or were still, current partners. Even the old partners, they were famous in the industry, not the kind that Brian dared to mess with. When the atmosphere in the room was almost at the required level, I spoke up to clearly state the reason for inviting everyone. Brian and I are divorced. The room immediately fell silent, with only the music playing in the background. It was fitting that the song played the line, a long time ago, there was someone who loved you for a long time. Someone hurriedly stepped forward to turn off the music. Why is this happening? The two of you have been in love for so many years, and have been married for 7. Obviously, the speaker suddenly remembered the phrase 7 years of itching and stopped. I replied indifferently, he's having an affair, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau last week. His mistress is pregnant. The private room immediately became noisy, some cursed, some were indignant on my behalf. But I didn't care anymore. Right now, I just wanted to see what would happen to him without me by his side. This wasn't revenge, I just wanted to see what kind of person he would become if I hadn't helped him from the beginning. Would he still be as successful as he is now, or would he just be a failure, living a meaningless life? I would wipe my eyes and wait and see. His company was lucky to have everyone's help before. From now on, it's not needed anymore, stop it all. Everyone naturally agreed with me, because the previous help was all out of respect for me. That year, when Brian was in his 3rd year of college, he and a few roommates tried to make a small game. Unexpectedly, they caught the eye of a game company. At that time, they thought they were the best, so they didn't care about the conditions set by the game company, and decided to establish their own company to develop game software. In the first months, they only focused on developing the game, thinking that the company was on the right track and very favorable. But when the game was almost completed, problems appeared one after another. For the company to make a profit, it needed to promote and bring the game to different platforms. These things required a professional team to work with partners. However, Brian and his teammates were typical engineering guys. Asking them to negotiate and persuade customers was like killing them. At that time, he frowned every day. Although he tried to hide his emotions in front of me, he still couldn't hide the anxiety and tension in his heart. Chapter 3. I couldn't bear to see him worrying about those problems every day, so I told him to focus on developing the game and leave everything else to me. At first, Brian refused, insisting that he could handle it himself and comforting me that he would handle everything properly, as long as I could wait for the day I graduated and marry him as a rich wife. I didn't respond, letting him do as he pleased. But when the company no longer had income but only expenses, he became even more stressed. Until one day, he took the initiative to tell me that he wanted me to help negotiate with companies to bring the game to their platforms. I happily agreed. Actually, since our previous conversation, I had already started looking for and researching companies that could cooperate with his company. In other words, I had prepared everything. With my open personality and my previous network of relationships, in no time, the game he developed appeared on major platforms. From then on, his company grew rapidly, and just 2 years after graduating, also a year after we got married, he received the title of new internet star. And from then on, I always stood behind him, to support him in all diplomatic activities. Media, hot news on social networks, partner platforms, all were quietly operated by me. After I helped him negotiate the first contract, he gave me 1/6 of the company's shares. Now, the first thing I need to do is to sell all those shares before my friends act, otherwise the value will drop sharply. That night, when the news of my wanting to sell my shares spread, Brian called immediately. His angry voice rang out from the phone, as if I had just done something terrible. Alice Mitchell. Who gave you the guts to sell your shares without informing me? What right do you have to do that? I played with my nails and calmly replied, I don't need you anymore. How could I want to touch your company anymore? Brian was so angry that he couldn't speak, but there was nothing he could do. After a while, his voice softened. If you want to sell, I won't stop you. Name a price and sell it to me. Oh, Mr. Anderson is so generous. I don't ask for much, just calculate it based on the market price. But that's just the value of the shares. As for the assets during the marriage, we will divide them as agreed, 6 parts for me, 4 parts for you. Hearing me say that, the other side was silent for a few seconds. I don't have that much money. How about this, you transfer the shares to me, all the marital assets will be yours. Hearing that, I paused, and began to calculate the total value. No way. Your 4 shares are not enough to buy the shares I'm holding. Moreover, you've spent quite a lot of money on that mistress. I have every right to reclaim that amount. Alice, don't go too far. Know when to stop. He gritted his teeth and warned, but I wasn't afraid at all. I advise you to make a better offer, otherwise I'll sell it to someone else. Okay. In addition to all the marital assets, I'll add 3 luxury apartments in the city center that I owned before getting married. Is that enough? Hearing that, I smiled slightly. Then thank you, President Anderson. I'll go to the company tomorrow to sign the contract. 2 weeks later, one early morning, as I was coming home and opening the door, I was startled to see a man sitting on the sofa. It was Brian Anderson. He seemed to have been up all night. The white shirt on his body was wrinkled. His eyes were deep, hard to guess what. He gritted his teeth, loudly shouting, Alice, what did you do to Rachel again? His voice was hoarse, shrill, to the point that even he was startled by his own voice. What did I do? No matter what I do, it has nothing to do with you now, right? I replied calmly, not really caring. His expression became more and more unsightly. You didn't come home all night last night, where did you go in the end? His questioning tone, like a criminal interrogation, made me extremely uncomfortable. I couldn't help but glare at him. What does it have to do with you whether I come home or not? Just as I was about to ignore him and enter the bedroom, Brian's cold voice stopped me. Alice, this is the last time I warn you, don't let your friends bother Rachel anymore. My patience has its limits. After hearing this, I immediately understood what he was talking about. Fiona Morgan is a famous barista. 2 days ago, to vent her anger on my behalf, she came to the coffee shop where Rachel worked. In front of all the staff and customers, Fiona asked to enjoy the coffee that Rachel had personally made. After taking a sip, she started criticizing everything from the grinding method, temperature, to brewing technique. Rachel was criticized to the point of crying, running out of the shop and almost getting hit by a car. For this, I only had one assessment: Fiona is just doing her daily job. Does she have to tell you about this? She's really too sensitive. I smiled at Brian's dark face, then continued, not only you, but my patience also has its limits. This house is the property I bought before getting married, it belongs to me. This afternoon, at 3 o'clock, I will call someone to change the locks. Quickly pack your things. If you don't make it, I will ask the cleaning staff to take all your things away. As for where they are going, I don't think you want to know. After saying that, I turned back into the bedroom and slammed the door shut. When I walked out, Brian had already left angrily. The next day, Fiona excitedly told me that there would be a class reunion next week. Unfortunately, I had another appointment that day. After I told her the meeting location, Fiona suggested holding the class reunion at that very place. After she promised that Brian wouldn't come, I agreed to stop by for a while. However, when I pushed the door open and entered, the first thing that caught my eye was that dog man and woman couple. Rachel intimately linked arms with Brian, looking smug as if she had successfully leveled up, looking really hateful. During college, Brian and I were a famous handsome couple in school. As soon as we graduated, we held a wedding, everyone in the school knew about it. Now, in front of our old classmates, Brian and Rachel were always inseparable. Their attitude was extremely intimate, and they even chatted happily with the professors who taught us. However, the expressions of the classmates and teachers in the private room were not very good. My relationship with them was originally much closer than with Brian. I also didn't understand where he got the courage to openly bring his lover to a class reunion like this. A teacher saw me and immediately walked over. Alice, what's going on? Sir, Brian is having an affair. The girl he brought along is the third person. I found out and decided to get a divorce. We are currently in a waiting period to think about it. The whole room immediately fell silent, everyone looked at each other in surprise. Even the people who had just talked to Brian and Rachel quickly became cold. I didn't feel ashamed of the divorce. I came here today to hang Brian and Rachel on the pillar of shame for everyone to see clearly. Brian didn't expect me to speak so bluntly. He glared at me angrily, but I just nodded slightly at him, then turned to smile and talk with the teacher and classmates. When the time was right, I asked the teacher for permission to leave, because I was busy meeting with a partner. As soon as I walked out the door, a hand pulled me back. Turning around, I saw that it was Brian. The company is having problems right now, is it because of you? Oh, so they've already started to act? Chapter 4. In fact, today is also the 29th day of waiting for the retreat, tomorrow will be the last day, and the day after tomorrow I can come get the divorce certificate. What does your company have to do with me? I sold you my shares and withdrew all business relationships. Now you want to blame me? Brian paused, perhaps not expecting me to give up his company so easily. I still have work to do. Oh right, tomorrow is the last day of the divorce waiting period. Meet at the Civil Affairs Bureau at 10 o'clock the day after tomorrow. After speaking, I turned and walked towards another private room. Rather than wasting time arguing with him, making money was more important. Pushing the door open and entering, I heard a familiar voice calling, Alice, I've saved you a seat, come and sit. Daniel Anderson whispered to me, why are you late? Hurry up and eat something. Daniel and I have known each other for a long time. He went to the same high school as Brian and I, but he was 2 years ahead of us. When Brian and I were in 10th grade, he was already a 12th grader. I was naturally sociable, so when I heard that Daniel Anderson was not only tall, handsome, but also intelligent, and had been admitted directly to university when he was in 11th grade, I really wanted to get to know him. The first time we talked was when a classmate accidentally stepped on my shoe and made me fall during gym class. At that time, Daniel was a supervisor. He took me to the medical room and I proactively asked for his contact information. From then on, every time I met him at school, I greeted and chatted. Thanks to him, I also joined the student union, working with him in the propaganda committee. He was the head of the committee, and I was in charge of designing event posters, thanks to my many years of drawing experience. We gradually became close through the preparation sessions for the school sports festival, when he and I needed to discuss and check the content of the poster. Talking to Daniel is always very comfortable, he can talk about any topic. Therefore, becoming close to him is inevitable. Even though he graduated from college, we still didn't cut off contact. Unlike Brian, who was always quiet, if I didn't take the initiative, he might not text me once a month. In fact, the title of high school male god that Brian had was only because Daniel had graduated. The day I held the divorce certificate, the weather was exactly like the day we received our marriage certificate. It was early autumn, not too hot but not too cold either. The temperature, the sunlight, the gentle breeze. Everything was just right. As soon as I finished the divorce procedures, I walked out of the main hall and saw Rachel waiting at the door, looking very anxious. Seeing us come out, she immediately ran to Brian, as if hoping that he would immediately go in with her to get a marriage certificate. I walked towards Daniel, who was waiting for me outside. Rachel saw the man waiting for me, not only not inferior to Brian but also much better. Her heart became even more indignant. Is that Alice's boyfriend? Just got divorced and already has a new boyfriend? Hearing that, I immediately stopped, turned around and walked towards Rachel. Without saying a word, I slapped her hard in the face. You like being a mistress, that's your business, it doesn't mean everyone is like you. Take good care of your little bird, I'm not someone who knows how to hold back. Ignoring Brian's ugly expression, I turned around and walked away, got in the car and left. In the car, I told Daniel that he didn't need to hold back anymore, let's start a complete withdrawal. Previously, the problems Brian's company encountered were just a slight warning. Because everyone still respected me, because we hadn't officially divorced. Now that everything was over, they could act freely. In less than a month, I saw the news about Brian in the newspaper. Most of his company's sales staff had quit, and business operations were almost at a standstill. The newly recruited employees didn't know anything, and it would take at least a month for them to get used to the job. But by then, it was unknown whether the company would still exist. Half a month later, I had dinner with Fiona and went home. From afar, I saw a figure walking back and forth in front of my house. When the car got closer, I realized it was Brian. Why did he come to see me instead of his beloved little bird? Alice, you're back. Have you been doing well lately? As soon as I heard him open his mouth, I had a headache. What was he trying to do again? Okay, stop. Mr. Anderson, just call me Miss Mitchell. Tell me, what business do you have here? Brian was interrupted by me, momentarily stunned. Alice, my company's business, is it you who did it? Your company's business? Don't blame everything on me like that. Am I that cheap? Seeing my displeased expression, Brian was a little confused. Mr. Anderson, please go home. Ever since I sold my shares to you, I haven't interfered in any of your company's business. If there's any problem, don't come to me. I opened the door to enter the house, but before I could close it, I heard his voice. Rachel broke up with me. After the company had problems, she took a large sum of money and ran away. She also abandoned the child. I've already called the police. My hand paused on the door for a moment, then coldly replied, what does that have to do with me? From now on, you two don't need to tell an unrelated person like me about your business. Oh, right, Mr. Anderson, we met in the maternity ward that day, guess why I was there? Brian stood there for a moment, as if he had just realized something. His eyes were red, but he couldn't say a word. I closed the door, and before the door rang, his last words came, we really can't go back. What was he thinking? Things had come to this point, and he still wanted to go back. I wasn't someone who liked to be abused. From then on, I never saw Brian again. I only heard news about him from others. Brian reported it to the police, and then the police caught Rachel. It turned out that Rachel was a professional scammer, sentenced to 20 years in prison. Among the victims, Brian was not the first and not the last, but he was the one who suffered the most damage. The games developed by Brian's company were removed from the platforms one after another, and the losses were incalculable. The newly recruited employees were also unable to negotiate with other platforms, causing the company to stagnate. Shareholders withdrew their capital one after another, and the company faced the risk of bankruptcy. In the end, Brian's company officially went bankrupt, and his whereabouts were unknown. Later, Daniel told me that Brian had returned to our old neighborhood and used the last $200,000 to buy a cemetery plot. He built a fake grave for our child. But the child was never born, so it could not be called a real fake grave. It is said that he visited the grave every day, and insisted that it was a girl. The information recorded on the gravestone was also that of a daughter. It is said that his parents arranged countless blind dates for him, but when the girls learned that the reason for his previous marriage was because he had an affair, they all refused. I heard that Brian became quiet and only opened his mouth once in a while. I heard that his parents were so heartbroken that they left the old neighborhood. I heard that. Gradually, I didn't hear any more news about him. 3 years after the divorce, I accepted Daniel's confession. A year later, Daniel and I got married. The wedding was held very grandly. Although I had been divorced, Daniel didn't care about that at all. "Don't make a big deal out of it, I'm a divorced person, and you're still organizing such a grand wedding, aren't you afraid that people will laugh?" I said while teasing his ears, my mouth constantly advising him. Daniel leaned against my chest, rubbed his head against my stomach, and said with a smile, "You're a divorced person, but this is my first marriage. Let's do it the way it was the first time. Let's see who dares to laugh." Before we were together, why didn't I know Daniel was such a spoiled and stubborn person? In the past, he was the perfect example of a mature, successful man. Why are you spoiled now? You weren't like that before. I laughed helplessly. I wasn't with you before, so I had to pretend to be serious. Now that you belong to me, I don't need to act anymore. He said proudly. At the wedding, I seemed to see Brian. He stood in a hidden corner, so skinny that I couldn't recognize him, wearing the suit I bought him before we got divorced. The clothes that used to fit him now looked baggy. He held in his hand a bouquet of flowers that was very similar to the one he used to propose to me. When I looked again, that corner was empty. Perhaps I was mistaken. The end.